Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So, Jazakallah khair, Dr. Shangiti, and for Triple IT for hosting me here, alhamdulillah. It's an honor to be here at the institute that we've read a lot about, whose books we've read avidly, and alhamdulillah to be actually sharing an office space with Professor Anjum actually is quite a bounty, alhamdulillah, so may we all give thanks. So I'm going to inshallah ta'ala start with dua Allahumma alimna bima yanfa'una wa yanfa'una bima tu'allimuna zidna bifadlika al-ilma wa ta'liman innaka ala kulli shay'in qadir. That Allah enlighten us and ennoble us with the knowledge and grant us beneficial knowledge inshallah in this lecture. So as you heard, I'm going to be talking a little bit about constructing the field of Islamic bioethics, and particularly for our audience, since many of you come from different aspects of Islamic studies, why I think this growing field is pretty important for the study of Islam generally. So, there we go. So here's the agenda for the talk. I want to talk about Islamic bioethics generally as the literature, highlight the principal producers and consumers of this developing field, and then talk a little bit about the conceptual gaps that plague the field of Islamic bioethics. That will make a good segue to the second part of the talk, which discusses key questions that inform the construction of this field and how they relate and are important for the study of Islam. Particularly, I want to focus on three areas. One about source material and methods of study of Islam. The second area is going to be about Muslim embodiment and identity formation. And the third aspect is going to be about epistemology and disciplinary boundaries of ethics. And lastly, should we have time, inshallah, I'm on the timer myself, I'm going to highlight a little bit more about my research project on the applicability of maqasid frameworks for biomedicine, particularly around how they might provide a vision for the essential dimensions of health and well-being, as well as a theological framework for bioethics, such as say, and healthcare structuring. So inshallah ta'ala, that is my hope. I will, because I'm on a time limit, I'm going to have a little bit of interaction, but I'm probably not going to take your questions in between, so that we can have a robust question and answer session at the end, if you don't mind. Yeah? Okay. So, as you heard from Dr. Shangiti, I lead this program, the Initiative on Islamic Medicine at the University of Chicago, which conducts research at this intersection between the Islamic tradition, biomedicine, and Muslim practices. So we study how Islam and Islamic religiosity inform the way in which Muslims take care of their health, the things they do to seek healthcare, and then the challenges that they face in the healthcare system. We conduct research of Muslim physicians in the way that they perceive Islam to inform their identity as physicians, in the way that Islam might inform challenges they face in the healthcare system as professionals, as well as how Islam serves as a source of ethical guidance for them in their practice. And then we study ulama, broadly defined, who opine on biomedicine through their legal writings. They incorporate scientific knowledge. How do they do so? And then when they give fatwa and other rulings, what are the constructs by which they attend to the biomedical imagination? So we conduct empirical, textual, and theological research. And all of this, so the first step of an academic, they will tell you that we need to do research. The goal of this research actually is to create conversation between various different disciplinary experts to create a holistic understanding of both how we might improve the healthcare system to accommodate Muslim patients, and then how we might form this field of Islamic bioethics. So that's my work broadly defined and the initiative that I lead at the University of Chicago. So now let's start with just talking about the field of Islamic bioethics. This is a question for you all, right? So who needs and who searches for Islamic bioethical guidance? You are all here. The talk said Islamic bioethics. So this should tell me that you can inform and answer this question. So who searches for it? Who says something here?
Sorry, I just came. I don't know what's going on. So what's the question?
Who needs or who searches for Islamic bioethical guidance?
I think the patients and the doctors.
The patients and doctors. And how come?
I mean, they are the first, they are involved, right? This is about bioethics, so patient and doctor would be the first.
But for what purpose?
Oh, for the management.
Okay, so they're seeking bioethical guidance for the management of their patient, of physicians are for the management of patients.
Right.
And patients are for what purpose?
Oh, for their benefit, I guess, from a religious point of view, obviously, we're talking about Muslims.
Okay.
So they would want to do it the way Sunnah and the Sharia.
Okay, very good. Other thoughts? Other people? Yes.
I think this, I don't know too much about this, but I'm guessing. We are in a continuous negotiation as Muslims with our environment because continuously we have to worry about, is it the right thing to do? Are we stepping out of the boundaries? And to me it seems like that is the kind of question you're looking at.
So what group? So we talked about patients and physicians. You're identifying what group?
I think I would be looking at all the Muslims.
And so they can negotiate what specifically?
Whatever challenges face them in terms of their health or the treatments they're faced with,
Okay.
the choices they make.
Okay.
There's a question of organ donation.
Mm-hmm.
There's the question of transplant,
Right.
accepting organs, and so all those kind of things.
All right. So let me any other thoughts? Last thought here. Please go ahead.
I think researchers in pharmaceuticals as well as in the medical field in general.
For what purposes?
Again, because there are certain things that are ethical, like the genetic type of stuff with replication and things like that.
Right.
As well as
many
ingredients and
Islamic centers
ingredients.
and chaplains now in hospitals increasingly are looking for
Right. Right. So I think we've covered most of these. So I'll call them the consumers of Islamic bioethics writing. We identified patients, right, who might Muslim patients who might want concordance between the medical care they receive and Islamic regulations as they perceive them. Muslim healthcare providers who desire for an Islamic ethos, right, and ethics for their practice. Religious leaders, as you identified, Dr. Mir, right, who seek religiously and medically constant guidance to help counsel patients, providers, and others. Healthcare institutions in general, right, particularly in this context, right, that are servicing Muslim patients. They want to identify resources to assist in providing culturally sensitive and high-quality healthcare. And then there's a variety of unnamed but polymorphous actors, policy advocates and community leaders, I call them, who seek information and data that can help make the case for cultural accommodations and Muslim-sensitive healthcare structuring and policies. And I'll just give you an anecdote. So last week there was a forum at the White House on precision medicine, and they're trying to create a database of a population representative database of people who have given their tissues or have given some saliva and genetic codes, so they can create tailored therapies for the population of the United States. Now they're trying to get a diverse population, so they have, Hispanic communities, African American communities, and various other actors. And a Muslim organization was invited to that forum because they wanted to have Muslims represented potentially, right, in that as well. So in the sense that there's this huge policy ramification of how healthcare is structured that might be informed by Muslims being at the table. So in any case, this is just one way in which this is important. So the other side, we talked about the consumers, the other side are the producers of Islamic bioethics, right? And I'm going to take them in here also for you to share with me who you think are the ones who are writing about Islamic bioethics. Who are the producers of this material?
People like you.
People like me. I'm, a physician, right? So a physician, go ahead, others.
Scholars.
Faqih, okay, Islamic jurist, all right, others?
I'm going to go back to say what we just said. Actually, Islamic Muslim Association in North America started as one of the fundamental things, this area. Did it at whatever, but it's come to a whole new level with scholars like young Dr. Padela. So what he said is very correct.
So a Muslim organization or professional body. Anything else? One more thought?
Researcher.
Researchers? What type of research? What do you mean?
Islamic studies.
Islamic studies researchers. Very good. So I think we've covered them all. So typically when you ask someone on the street, you would get this thought, okay, well, if I ask a question, as you said, or one person said here, organ donation or transplant, what's the Islamic ethical opinions on this? You would have a physician who often raises the question to a jurist, right? And a jurist thinks about the Quran, Sunnah, Maqasid, the Sharia, Qawa'id, al-Fiqhiyya, and all these other things from the textual sources and the formal sources of Islamic law. and then thinks about whether such an act is along the spectrum. You know, the Hanafi have 7, but I'm here giving to the other schools here. So in any case, he comes out with a fatwa, right? Or you have many scholars and many physicians coming together, and a decision, a qararat are issued, or various decisions are issued around this issue. And many people think that this is actually Islamic bioethics proper. Right? This is a central aspect. The fatwa are the central aspect where Islamic bioethics is produced, and it's produced by these individuals, jurists. Now, as someone also sitting in the Islamic studies section of the academy, I'll tell you that this is actually a little bit problematic, and we'll leave that for the Q&A session. But fatwa inherently have limitations, and that means that they cannot necessarily use them to form the normative. This is just an idea. But in any case, that's where most people point. So you'll see, okay, we'll go online and find fatwa on organ donation. I didn't do this because there was no conversation with anyone else, but this is the website I pulled up. But there are other producers of Islamic bioethics writing, right? So there are physicians who write for physician and patient audiences. These are all papers several years old from Medline, which is a bibliographical database that physicians look towards. You have, as someone mentioned, Islamic studies individuals of a variety of sorts, right? So these 2 books here are by John Brockup from conferences, who's a historian, Islamic historian of Maliki texts, actually. There is Varda Esparchaim, who's in Haifa. She's an Islamic law person from UCLA initially. You have our professor Abdulaziz Sachedina that we all know, who's here at George Mason. And then you have Dariush Atageshi, who's actually, his training is in comparative law and human rights, I believe, in Switzerland. So you have different sorts of academicians who have PhD qualifications in some Islamic studies or looking at Muslim studies, and they're writing as well on this topic. You have physician organizations, as mentioned by Dr. Mir again, Imana, right, and others. This is the IOMS on the bottom here, the Islamic Organization for Medical Sciences in Kuwait, which come together. Sometimes they bring together physicians and physician sort of ethicists to come and opine on Islamic bioethical issues, or they actually bring jurists into conversation as well. This is what someplace no one really mentioned, but these are ministries of health in quote unquote Islamic countries. Right? So Saudi Arabia, Iran, and Pakistan, they also issue decrees, and they issue laws. And one could say that when I want to look at Islamic bioethics in vivo, that's where I have to go. A mentee of mine is doing a doctorate at Oxford, and she's interested in research guidelines in the Muslim world, right? And Islamic ethical research guidelines. And her primary source material is the production of these bodies, who have in their statutes that they're ruled and governed, at least a source of law for their policies is Islam. So how do they determine health research, and what do they think about? Right? One can argue that that is also a genre and a source, and these are producers of Islamic bioethics material. So with all these individuals and all these different disciplines brought together to write about Islamic bioethics, it's no surprise that there's a lot of confusion, right? On what is ethics, what is Islamic, what is bioethics, what is medical ethics, what's clinical ethics. And so I want to kind of hold that suspense, because actually that is the case of the field. So I will argue, and if I can have the time to argue, but I'll tell you that there's not only conceptual confusion around what is good and right, what is wrong, what's permissible, what's haram, right, that you can glean from these writings, but most of these writings miss the mark. And for me, the mark is that it is immediately actionable by a patient or physician. Right? That your writing is immediately actionable by a patient and physician at the bedside. For me as a physician, that's my bias. I want things that can be applicable, that can be applied by me at the bedside. Right? So that's my bias. And I think a lot of bioethical conversation occurs in that patient-physician relationship. But that's my marker. And so that my argument is that this stuff doesn't meet the bar for us. It doesn't meet the threshold for that. And I'll give you examples. And I'll give you examples from my own guild so that I don't, hurt anybody else's feelings. But so this is a friend of mine, Hassan Shanawani. He and Mohammed Hassan Khalil did a review of Medline literature. Again, this is the database that we use as physicians, and these journals are the ones that we look to for medical and ethical guidance. So he reviewed articles for over 55 years, 1950 to 2005, with just these 2 search terms, Islam or Muslim and bioethics. He found 146 papers, so that's less than 3 a year, right, over this 55-year period. And the authors were from the majority are from the Middle East, and then the next group was from the United States. What's important for all of us here, as we sit at IIIT, is this is the content. Only 11 papers, less than 10%, mention more than one universal Islamic position. Only 5 mention anything about concepts or sources of Islamic law. Right? And these are physicians opining on Islamic bioethics. I mean, the titles of the paper, or the abstracts, talked about Islamic or Muslim bioethics.
So what did they base?
That's a very good question. I can give you those papers. But the implication is what? That the writings lack scholarly depth, and they present a caricature of the Islamic ethical legal tradition as monolithic and simplistic. Right? So that if you're, as a researcher, you're going to look at this material, you'll find that potentially this is not going to service you, and nor does it service the patient at hand. So that's 2005. This is a survey that I did in 2013. So we did a national survey of American Muslim physicians that was funded by the John Templeton Foundation and in collaboration with Imana. So we mailed out a questionnaire to a random sample of almost 750 physicians from the Imana membership over in 2013, 3 different waves using the standard up-to-date methodologies for mailed surveys. So these are the results, right? So 85% of these physicians reported being somewhat or very familiar with Islamic bioethics. And 59%, so less than 2/3, reported Islamic bioethics somewhat or greatly influences their practice. So compared to the data before, you would say this is pretty good, right? But this is what they do. Nearly or less than, or 55%, more than a half, never really read any Islamic bioethics books. Nearly 2/3 never really consult any Islamic jurists when they face a bioethical challenge. Nearly 80% never or rarely look to Islamic Medical Fiqh Academy verdicts. So there's a dissonance here between an assumption of what we know and then how we know it, right? So I use the term, they don't know what they don't know, right? As a guild, we don't know what we don't know. And I hope to remedy that by some of the stuff that I'm doing here at IIIT, but this is a state. Now, as that's the physicians, and then you can imagine what the patients receive, as often in the masajid and in the healthcare encounter, you seek Muslims, physicians to give you guidance, and it's not necessarily clear that you're looking for medical guidance, you're looking for ethical guidance. So we can only imagine, right, what the patient population is understanding, or the imams who get their guidance from physicians some way. So I think this is a challenge for our community. So here's the current state of the field, right? As I mentioned to you, the producers, there are many different disciplines engaging in this field with different goals and expertise. There's largely a silo problem with little crosstalk. There are conceptual issues, which is going to be the next part of my talk. So what defines the Islamic, what is the scope of bioethics? These are the 2 terms to create the field, but these conceptual issues plague the field. The methodological issues, as I pointed out a little bit, right? What are the source materials for study of Islamic bioethics? And then what are the methods used to research and develop such materials? Right? That's an open question. And then the practical issues, that there are scattered writings of limited insight that are available to the population at hand. And there's really a crisis of authority regarding Islamic bioethical expertise. Right? Who is the Islamic bioethicist that you can get guidance from, or should expect to get guidance from? Is it the Muslim chaplain? We have a chaplaincy sort of mode in the last 10 years in the United States. Is it the chaplain? Is it the imam in the masjid? Is it the mufti sitting in the academy, right? In the seminary, sorry? Is it the physician at the bedside? Is it the academic who's writing books, right? May have or not have any interaction with the community at large? Or is it the sociologist who studies how actually Muslims make ethical decisions, right? Who is it? Or is it all of them? So this plagues this developing field. And I think this makes it that there is such a tremendous opportunity to advance Islamic studies in this field that we should all be involved in the conversation. As immediate relevance to us, we're all patients at one level, right? And it also has for the broader study of Islam in general. So let me point some of those out. So why is Islamic bioethics, at least in my view, important to the study of Islam? So I mentioned this at one level, that Islamic bioethics is concerned with the normative, right? And by the normative I mean what is Islam and what signifies the Islamic. Right, some could say that Islam is, from a sociological, social science perspective, a tradition of practices observed by a community. Right? That could be a community that's time-bounded, or it could be a community that consists today and continues on. But that's a tradition of practices, and that is what Islam is, and then your methodology for studying Islam would be based on that. Some could say it's a meaning-making system, right? That's a negotiated system all the time. That's the embodiment that makes something Islam, right? That it doesn't reside within text necessarily. So this creates a cultural system. So as a cultural anthropologist, right, or as actually an empirical scientist, you might develop tools and measures to understand this meaning-making that's occurring in the society. You might look at what is Islam from a more theological perspective. I know that term has somewhat inconsistent relevance within the Islamic tradition, but in one sense you can say, well, what is Islamic moral theology? Is it grounded in fiqh? Is it law? Is that what makes something Islamic or makes it Islam? That's the marker, right? Is Islamic represented by, at least in ethics, by the adabi or akhlaqi sciences, by the sciences of virtue or the knowledge of virtue? Is that what defines something as Islam or Islamic? That's the marker of the tradition. Right, what is the role of kalam in Sufism? And I use those in terms for ontology and epistemology here, right? Where does that come into play when you think about Islam? So these are questions about developing a moral theology, and it comes out in Islamic law and ethics, and obviously then it's reflected into the Islamic bioethical field, or whatever the field we try to create. At the same time, you can think about what is Islamic, what signifies the Islamic, right? Is the Islamic source bounded? You hear this today. Again, the last 20 years is something that we've all become in some way traditionalists or Lahirites, but we all say Quran and Sunnah, you bandy it about, right? So is it source bounded? Is the Islamic source bounded? That you say, okay, I can see an ayat referred to here in this writing, that makes it Islamic. Or I see a hadith quoted here, that makes it Islamic. Or that person is wearing something that we know that the Rasulullah did, so that's the Sunnah, that makes him Islamic. Right? Signifying what is Islamic is very important for the study of Islam. And here again it comes to fore in Islamic bioethics. Some would argue that what is Islamic is scholar bounded. So it's a negotiated tradition of understandings that are promulgated by a scholarly class. And I know that has implications for naturalizing authority in a certain class of ulama, but in any case, it's a discursive tradition. That's what's bounded. So the fact that it's Islamic, right, is not that it is necessarily textually bound or in text, but rather it's part of this understanding, right? This oral, quote unquote, oral tradition, or this group of individuals who have come to some understanding, that they offer us what is the Islamic. Okay, in our lives we have this. Forget about bioethics. We have this issue with what we think about when we make decisions. In any case, right? When you decide what to purchase for mortgage, what's Islamic, what's not. Right? So in any case, this is something that is part of this field. Another area, or another sort of idea, staying within the same parameters, right? So there's Islamic bioethics has to do with the end goals of bioethical practice, right? So how do we move from what we can do, or after we answer that question, to what should we do, right? And another way to say that would be from moving from the zone of Islamic permissibility, from the mubah, which is the legal minimum, right? Or some would say actually makruh is, because there's no afterlife sin, to ihsan, right? The perfected optimum. How do we move there? How can an Islamic bioethics inform that, right? And that's also germane to all the sciences of Islamic law and theology. How do we get people there? How do we decide what's there? So, and another important question is, how do we connect the production of good to the being good, right? This also has the same idea. So how do I, now I'm not just worried about the act, but I'm worried about the agent of the act, right? So it's not just the act is permissible, rather I want someone to be good in themselves, right? So in the Quran, Allah talks about, right, the son of Nuh, right? Innahu amrun ghayru salih, right? That he is, right? He is an action that is, right? When you're talking about Nuh alayhi salam, the son of a prophet, he's asking about him, and Allah uses this idea that, at least right, a term that he is bad deeds, not that he does. So the production, we're all involved in the production of our deeds are good. So this is also germane to Islamic bioethics. So why, I think it's relevant is because of what I just said. That all of these questions are germane to Islamic studies, right? What we define as Islam informs the methods of study of Islam. There are different ways of studying Islam in the academy, right? Some talk about the academic study of Islam, the sociological study of Islam, right? And some talk about the seminary study of Islam. The Islamic informs what we think about as the recovery, renewal, or revivalist projects that we're all involved in some way or form on this time. That's why you're here at IIIT, I would assume, right? And questions about who is the expert and authority also plague our daily lives as well as Islamic studies. It really informs the ways we connect to and produce the Islamic tradition. I would argue that the Islamic tradition is being produced. It is continually produced. It is not one that resides somewhere in the past. So constructing the field of Islamic bioethics demands conceptual rigor and clarity as it engages with other moral frameworks in our pluralistic society, and there provides the venue for critical engagement with the intellectual tradition and its authority structures. So that is why, in one way at least, Islamic bioethics is important to the study of Islam. So I said I want to talk about two other ways, so let's move to the second way. This is about identity formation. So Islamic bioethics addresses identity formation in politics. Right? And what do I mean by that? Well, it addresses the question of what makes a Muslim physician distinctive. Right? Is a Muslim physician an Islamic physician, quote unquote, because they practice some version of Islamic medicine? Right? That they're practicing remnants of Tibb Nawawi or something else. That what they're doing, the service that they're providing, right, resides or is based upon frameworks and thinkings that are embedded and bound within the Quran and Sunnah in some sort of way, or at least that time period. Is that what makes a person a Muslim physician, qua Islamic physician? Or is it that the Muslim physician is one who follows Islamic ethics and law? Right? Islamic bioethics needs to understand that, because you would have to say that no, it's the Islamic, the material that makes it Islamic, or it is actually the act, the agent that makes it Islamic, right? So, or is the Islamic physician one who's living out a practice of medicine, believing it to be a calling from God? And this is something that I borrow from our Christian colleagues, right? This idea of calling, which to my research has not really exist as well in the Islamic tradition. Right? There is much more of a divorce between shughl, right? And what you do in your daily life and what my religious spiritual practices might be. But in any case, is someone in this context who says that I am a physician because I was called by God to be a physician, does that constitute him as a Muslim Islamic physician? Right? Or actually, is there no such thing? There's no such thing as an Islamic or Muslim physician. Medicine is the same everywhere in the world, whether it's in Saudi Arabia or in Pakistan or is in the United States, right? The tools, techniques that we use is all the same. It's all globalized. It's biomedicine. Why are we worried about the Muslim Islamic physician? Can there be one? So that's the point where it addresses identity politics, not just formation, right? What does it mean to be a Muslim in the United States? Or how do we mark a Muslim professional identity in a pluralistic context, right? So this moves from just formation to politics. Right? What binds us together? We are Muslim physicians trained in different sort of circumstances, ages, epochs, institutes, countries. So if we're calling for an Islamic bioethical norm, how does that bind us together, or does it not bind us together? Right? So that's just internal in the Muslim community. What about the larger question? Is Islamic bioethics for Muslims or for all? So I did a conference in 2011 at the University of Chicago, which is called Where Religion, Bioethics, and Policy Meet. And I had invited as a speaker a professor of law from a Christian Catholic college, and he asked this question. He just asked this question, and people were dumbfounded because they hadn't thought about it. Right? Is the Islamic bioethics you're producing for me, or is it just for you? Right? Do you believe it's for me, or do you believe it's for you, or is it for everybody, or is it not? And that again informs the formation of a Muslim physician identity and their ethical character, or the bioethics that they want to produce and be involved with. So again here, all these questions are germane to what I'm going to say Muslim studies, not Islamic studies, but Muslim studies. Right? What is the Islamic or Muslim physician? That refers to a self-identification with the faith, and then therefore informs descriptive and cultural studies of Muslims. Right? The notions of identity formation and politics, these represent a critical area for engaging with modernity. We live in a globalized society, right? And how we engage with that, and what we think are the rubrics for engaging with that, are related to an Islamic bioethics. So here is the opportunity, I think, for Islamic studies or Muslim studies in general. that the discipline of Islamic bioethics, and here are their quotes, so Islamic bioethics, studies would require understanding how the ethical becomes lived and understood, and thereby represents a connection between Islamic studies proper, right, and Muslim studies. So just playing upon the textual versus sociological perspective. Okay, so now a third area before I end shortly. This has to do with how we Muslims living in a what's the word? Living in a sanctified and in some ways a fortress of identity and texts, right? Gaze upon the other, the world out there, right? So this picture is from the Islamic Art Museum in Doha, right? Doha, as all those buildings didn't exist when I was there in 2005. They all came up after that, it looks like. So in any case, Doha is at this epicenter of engaging with modernity. So here are some questions that I think, again, why Islamic Bioethics is important, right? And the panel on the left here, right, typifies that, right? So it's a dialogue between science and Islam. Do we read science into the text, or do we read it outside? Read it out from the text in a certain way, right? So is our ethical legal imagination residing within the text, or is it one that we approach the text with? So to give you an example, when we think about the idea or a construct in Islamic law of istihada, right? This is a making halal, istihada, make something halal that was haram before. The imagination with what legal theorists looked at were that they knew that there were hadith talking about wine being prohibited, there were Quranic injunctions, but we knew that vinegar was said by Rasulullah to be a great condiment, right? So what happens to wine when it becomes vinegar? Because something that's haram becomes halal. And they approached that, it was in the text, right, with an imagination, with a scientific imagination, a technical imagination, by what's happening. And if I can tell you that this happens somewhere else, I can extend the ruling, right? The illah resides there. So do we read in the text, or do we read out from the text? Are we taking our imagination into the text, or are we saying that the text tell us it's only wine, it's only vinegar, khalas, you're done, nothing else, right? So this is the idea of our ethical, legal, technical concepts and imaginations dated? Is there some historicity to that? Or are they essentialist constructs? And for those in Islamic studies, these terms might resonate. And we talk about this in many areas of Islamic law. Then another question would be about ontology. What is the role of human reason in ethical reflection? Right? So those who love creedal studies, and we talk about Ashari and Mu'tazili, and Maturidi thought here. Right? What is are we bound as ethicists, I'm talking about Islamic bioethics, to the tyranny of the text, what the text says? Or is there an independent ontological authority given to my mind, to rationality? Can we get at moral norms, right, just by using our minds? Lying is good, right? Well, that's a bad example. Let's use an example. Lying is bad, or is lying good? How do we know that? Is that because Rasulullah said it? That the Quran tells us that? Or is that because I just have some fitrah, using that term, that is bad or good? Right? These are debates that are medieval debates, quote unquote, right? But ones that have a clear implication for how we define ethics and how we circumscribe law in Islam. And this is actually at the center, heart of Islamic bioethics. Finally, right, how do we integrate scientific knowledge and data into moral law? So this question, let me give you an example. So Islamic logicians, right, thought about, and I'll use Ghazali's rubric here, but they thought about how can we reach yaqeen? How can we know something yaqeen, right? There are different levels and degrees of certainty. And borrowing from some Hellenistic thought and other sort of philosophical thought, he determined, and he said, okay, these are the ways that you can reach certainty. And this is actually part of all our deen. Right? So for example, we think about the Quran as one that's inimitable and it is 100% yaqini for us. Right? Allah SWT says in the Quran that He protects it. But aside from that, because of the mutawatirat that it comes through the many chains of transmission through which each ayah of the Quran comes to us, that we have this logical idea that it cannot be, these verses cannot have been put together, there was no collusion to come up with the Quran. Right? And this is the basis for how we think about law and how we adjudicate degrees of certainty. But there's another realm, or there are many other realms, right? they're mahsusat, or the mujabbarat, right? So when I see something happen all the time, right, that I take an apple and it drops to the ground, can I be certain that there is an operative idea here that this is certain knowledge, that if I let the apple go, it's going to hit the ground? That's not in the text. How would I understand that? Can I reach yaqini knowledge about that? What degree of certainty does it have? So this approach, why I use that example, is that you can say, hey, look, we have clinical trials that tell us that taking, hypertension medicine will help prevent a heart attack, to 50% probability over 10 years, whatever. That probabilistic thinking can be incorporated within Islamic law, right? If you understand how you reach certainty. And then if you reach certainty, I think you a little bit of shock, right? Then uncertainty is not something that we have to worry about. But that engagement with scientific knowledge is what's actually at the center as well of Islamic bioethics. Because if you say that, that dalal mafasid, awla wa muqaddam, right, jamb al-masalih, and you say, hey, look, XYZ act is going to bring about mafasid, how certain are we about mafasid, to use that qaida, right? How certain we are about brain death when we say it's death. So these things are all part of Islamic bioethics as well, or are at least at the center of it. So I'm ending now. So there's this last question, and I'm just going to give you my vision here, but there's another question, as I said, about bioethics. So we spoke a lot about the Islam and why Islamic bioethics is important to Islamic studies, but let's talk about bioethics for a second. Bioethics is a field that is growing. That's my 40 minutes, I think. But bioethics is a field that's growing, and there's a question whether it's interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary. By interdisciplinary, I mean that bioethics resides in the space between two different fields, or multiple different fields. And therefore, you need someone with expertise in multiple different fields to come at something that's bioethical. Or is it multidisciplinary, that all these fields inform a huge conception of what Islamic bioethics is? I am one who describes to the latter. It's multidisciplinary. And so for me, when I think about Islamic bioethics, I think that there are some moral inputs from the Islamic tradition that are in discursive, or they're in dialogical relationship to disciplinary partners from other areas. And that together then you come up with Islamic bioethics norms and values. Right? That just doesn't reside within one area or the other. But this is actually an open question as well, and will inform the way that we think about interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary studies from an Islamic perspective, right? Whether it be finance or whether it be bioethics. So I'm going to give you two-liners about my projects here, and then we're going to stop and open for questions. Right? So I'm here, alhamdulillah, doing some research. I was an engineer formerly, so I like running on the board. And so I'm looking at Maqasid Sharia, which you all know, at least in the conception by Imam al-Shatibi, right, that revolve around these 5 dhururiyat, right, dhururiyat al-khamis, protection of religion, life, intellect, lineage, and property. So my project is really just testing the maqasid, right? And I want to see it tested in different ways. And one of the ways I want to test it is subjected to this question: what are the essential dimensions of human health? Right? Can we back out a theological construction of health by examining the dimensions of health that are embedded within definitions of the 5 dhururiyat, particularly in Hifz al-Nafs or Hifz al-Hayat, depending on who you read, right? What are the dimensions of health that are attended to by these dhururiyat? And then does that leave us with a conception of what the human being should be, what his wellness is? And the other question I'm subjecting it to is, right, can the maqasid provide the hierarchical structure for an ethical rubric for bioethics, let's just say, right? So if you want to prioritize healthcare delivery, should we be focusing on providing people houses, or should we be focusing on giving people access to medicines for the flu? Right? That's a schema, the healthcare allocation schema, that might be informed or may not be informed by the maqasidi approaches. Can it provide an ethical legal framework for moral decision making? You have a patient at the bedside, right, who's near death. How do you prioritize interventions at that time? So this is the tests that I'm subjecting the maqasidi frameworks for. I'm going to not talk about this slide, but here are some of the preliminary papers that I'm, inshallah, hoping to author presently before I leave. So with that, I will end. Thank you very much.